Hero Podcast. Igniting both the art and the science of functional medicine. Here's your host, Dr. Brad Watts.
Dr. Shade, sir, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you being here.
I'm so happy to be here, Brad. It's always a pleasure conversing with you.
Yeah, so I've been following you around a little bit online, and I've seen what you're up to, and you got some cool things in the works, I see. Shaking hands and holding babies and that type of stuff as well. But you still find time for the lab, I hear.
I do. You know, that's really my roots. That's where I started all this stuff. And I'm a consummate innovator, inventor. And so I always got to get back in the lab to figure out what's going on. And to manage, I got a crew of 4 really killer guys that take this all down into practice. And so it's constant time in there. And a lot of that is shepherding the business with, what's your vision with it? It's not just like, oh, here's this cool product, and then I'll hand it over to these guys and I run back to the lab. People like to think that, and even some of my early business guys like to think that, and soon they're like, because really how you bring it out there reflects your vision too, and how you present it out to people and how you lecture about it, what colors you put with it, like the whole thing. It comes all the way down to who's going to sell it and how you're going to sell it.
That's why I ask, man.
Yeah. It's not, I don't just reach my hand out and hand it to another staff, It's,
all right. So what's one of your favorite things you guys have developed over the last year? It's been about a year since I had you on the podcast.
Yeah, I got 2 things. We're coming out with this, first the keto before 6 was like, that's the thing I take all the time. This thing that just launches you into keto. Oh my God. And that product base ends up going into a couple other formats, some of those different ingredients. And we have a capsule format coming out where it's called a self-emulsifying delivery system, where it's a capsule of kind of oils and surfactants, and they go into your stomach and they break into nanos in your stomach, and those absorb. And we can start working in some ingredients that are either too bitter to take orally with these sublinguals, or they might stain everything they touch, like curcumin.
Right.
And you get a drop of that on your white shirt and it's yellow forever.
I've done that, yes.
Yeah, and so we started playing around with these capsule systems, and then we figured we could work with some ingredients we usually wouldn't work with to even further enhance uptake. And so we have some ridiculous stuff, like this anti-inflammatory formula has both this broad spectrum curcumin. So that includes curcumin, turmeric oleoresin, and turmeric essential oil. So it's like this alchemical of turmeric. It's beautiful. And we paired that with boswellia and CBD all in one capsule. It turns out they all worked to build each other's blood levels. And we got a LCMS triple quad in so we could start looking at blood levels of everything ourselves. And our sublingual CBD is ridiculous absorption, 6 times higher than a normal oil. And then we doubled that again with this capsule format. And the curcumin, we got 310x absorption over powder. People are like, we have 9 times the absorption of a powder. We have 49 times. Well, we have 310, okay?
And okay, so let me understand this though. So you put liposome inside of a capsule.
Yeah, basically it's everything that becomes a liposome. When it hits the stomach, it pops out into a liposome. And this is a technique that you can do with oil core particles, but you can't really do it with water cores. So you can't do that with glutathione so well, or vitamin C, but you can do it with curcumin and boswellia and CBD and resveratrol, things like that.
That's a phenomenal idea, number one. But then number 2, you think about the cost-benefit ratio for consumers looking at 310x absorption. Oh my goodness!
I know. I mean, it's ridiculous. It just melts away pain, and you got that with the curcumin, the boswellia, and the CBD, all at these freaking phenomenal blood levels, and you're like, this is amazing.
So how long until that one's ready to try?
We're just getting the first soft gels put together on our trial runs, which are like smaller batches. And we're sending it out next week, so it'll be about 4 weeks until those are back. Okay. And so you'll start getting our beta tests. We'll have about 300 bottles of each to send out, and we'll follow right around with the big batch.
What are you going to call it so we know to look for it?
Microbe manager for the let's see. I don't know. I got the CBD Synergy is the CBD curcumin one.
Okay.
And then microbe manager, we're also doing a antimicrobial. This will be big in the Lyme world. And so it's all that anti-inflammatory work. And then we put antimicrobials in with it. And so you've got artemisinin and andrographis, propolis, and berberine all in there in these nanos. Because once you just start killing all these organisms, there's this big inflammatory response. And so you need to sort of dial that in and control the limits of that so you don't just burn the person right to the ground.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
So we call that one microbe manager.
There you go, microbe manager. It's like a
microbe manager.
Yeah,
with a B.
It's like a microbe bomb, is what it is. That's good.
Boom, and then you got all the anti-inflammatories to make sure you don't totally explode. Just the bug.
Gut remediator. All right. If you want to use that one, just send me the portion for the name.
I will. Your royalty for gut remediator.
So, when we look at chronic disease, which is what most of the time our listeners are focusing on, helping patients with chronic disease, one of the big things right now is pain, obviously. You have the opioid epidemic destroying people, especially in the Midwest, over Ohio, Indiana, that type of stuff. It's a huge mess. And you have innovators in the industry, like yourself, that are looking at basically setting people free by giving them a choice, working on these things that are down-regulating pain, etc. One of the products that you've had out for a while now that I so much appreciate is the CBD oil.
Oh, yeah.
Your CBD oil, when you talk about absorption, effectiveness, effective dosing strategies, one of the things that I'm wondering about from this perspective is this industry going to get regulated, or is it going to stay in the supplement world in the long term? What's your opinion on that right now?
Most indicators are saying it's going to stay in the supplement world. We're waiting for another round of guidance from FDA. We're going to move on doing a safety study on the nano hemp oil, and just to bolster our position there. And it does look like it's going to stay that way. It didn't before. It was just like, no, GW Pharma is going to force this thing through. But there was we've never had an industry before where there's so much grassroots support from it. I mean, when I go and I see my aunt and, you see your grandmothers and stuff, and they all got their bottles of CBD, things have changed. I mean, this is not something that's ever happened before. And you can't just take that away from everybody. I mean, it's $1 billion industry. It's one, you're taking away this thing that they love. And two, you just affected billions of dollars of the economy. They're not going to do that.
Right. And I think that's an interesting take on it when it gets accepted by the person you would least suspect. For instance, I was talking to somebody that I'd known from years past, and this gentleman became a preacher, and he called me and he goes, "Hey, I got to know, is there anything wrong with this?" And he's selling CBD oil, right, in an MLM. And he goes, "You can't be a preacher and be a drug dealer. I just need to know." No. You're good, man. You're good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my fundamentalist Christian aunt uses it all the time now. Yeah. And one of the big experiences for her was not just starting to use CBD for pain, but then when my uncle passed, she got into the medical THC side, and it was just a godsend for him. It was pancreatic cancer. It was horrible. And the pain, he was doing 1-to-1 CBD THC, and it was just a godsend.
So with your nano technology here, liposomal delivery system that you have, what is the absorption rate you had mentioned? Was it 6x? Is that what you had said? Or are you talking?
Yeah, it's about 5.5 x increase in absorption over just CBD and like hemp seed oil. Sure. And it's not just the total amount, it's where it shifts it. So in pharmacokinetics. That's amount in the blood over time. And the regular CBD absorption is over hours, maybe 2 hours after you take it, your blood peaks. But the nanos shift everything into a short window. In fact, we're seeing peaks in as little as 15 minutes after you take this stuff in the oral cavity. And if you're dealing with pain, you want relief. You don't want it 2 hours later. Or in the curcumin studies we did, some of these advanced deliveries peaked 8 hours later. Like, how are you going to plan your life around this? I'll be in pain in 8 hours. I better take this now.
That's right. That's right. So the mechanism, when you talk about cannabinoids, et cetera, have there been any developments or exposures really in that mechanism? Or have you understood the mechanism for like 10 years and it's just been a matter of putting something together to affect those receptor sites?
For pain?
Yeah.
It's really, we had to get that understanding. And as you get the understanding, then you modulate how you're making the formulas to work better on that. And so first, everybody's like, well, it's about inflammation, but there's 5 billion anti-inflammatories. Just about anything. Go chew on a tree, it's anti-inflammatory. It's not doing what this is for pain, all right? And so, yeah, there's local anti-inflammatory action, but then there's neurological differences. So there's in the glutamate GABA balance, when your glutamate excess, that makes you fight or flight, that makes you really tense, and that diminishes GABA, and GABA is necessary for shutting off pain receptors. So CBD quickly balances those two and gets your GABA tone back up by calming down or reeling in your glutamate tone. So you have that, you have the inflammatory aspect, you have the GABA aspect, and then they're finding these other receptors, TRPV, the transient receptor potentiated vanilloid receptors, all these, like, can't they come up with a simpler name for this? So at least you can call it TRPV instead of transient receptor potentiated.
That's right.
Amyloid receptor. And those are ones that are involved in itch and pain, and those are the ones that capsaicin works on. And so, remember the capsaicin gels and stuff, and you're like, so screaming hot pepper juice is going to help my pain. Right. And it does through these receptors. And so CBD works on those too. And then, so that's just the CBD story. And then which other cannabinoids are you going to bring in? And the story is really about how high you titrate up the THC levels. So one of the greatest things recently for us, they passed the Farm Bill in 2019, and we immediately launched with a full spectrum. All the stuff you've been using before, except for years ago, were broad spectrum, where you yank out the THC, but you have a couple other cannabinoids along with your CBD. Now, with the full spectrum, now we have the residual THC that was legally present in the hemp. And so you're looking at products that are 25 to 30 CBD to 1 THC. And that 1 part THC, it makes such a difference, because CBD sets up the cannabinoid receptors, CB1, CB2, especially CB2, but it's not able to activate them, and the THC really activates them. It can work by building up your endocannabinoids, the anandamide and 2-arachidonoglycerol. They'll hit those. But when just a little bit of THC, boom, you really get a lot of effect. But then if you got to get into deeper medical marijuana or really severe pain and cancer states and stuff, that's when you got to titrate up the THC a little higher.
So one of the things you had talked about just briefly there before we got into the cannabinoids was how utilizing CBD oil to downregulate
the glutamate GABA balance. And so in the brain, you wind up glutamate. Glutamate is essential for being on it and having memory and stuff. It's the sympathetic autonomic tone, the fight or flight. But when it winds too much and when it gets overactivated, first thing you get is too much memory, which leads to fear, because you start remembering everything bad, and that creates anxiety. Now, that's a survival mechanism, but then you start having fear about everything, and that's anxiety. Right. And then it gets even farther, and the glutamate and the immune system, the microglia, start into this little war, and the whole thing goes out of hand. And CBD is able to stop the microglial side and the glutamate side, stabilize both of those, and that allows the GABA to come back into balance. And then when you talk about GABA, like the liposomal GABA, that has similar things, but it does it more by bringing up the GABA tone. But we find that GABA can do so many of the things that CBD does, because even on the immune cells that have CB2 receptors, cannabinoid receptors, and you can calm their hyperactivity with CBD, they also have GABA receptors, and you can calm their hyperreactivity with the GABA. So now we're working on blends of GABA and CBD to kind of come at it from both sides.
So because you have both products right now, being able to use those with the patients in a chronic pain syndrome situation, what kind of strategy would you deploy?
You know, you could just throw both at them. You could see which one is working best. Often, you know, it'll be like somebody will have a hesitancy about CBD, so you just give them GABA.
Sure.
If they have sleep issues, you go to the GABA, because GABA is better for sleep than CBD. Some of the kids you'll run into have paradoxical reactions to CBD and get actually wound up by it. That's a bit of an allergy to it, and then you go with GABA. We started the GABA years ago for this, to calm down neurological hypersensitivity, but it turns out it calms down immunological hypersensitivity too. So like I said, we're starting to blend the two together, so they're coming together. And as far as the strategy of which one to start with, you don't always know, but that is that, if sleep is it, go with that first. That's about all I have to tell you.
All right.
Throw both at them.
So is there a time frame when you talk about calming down neurologic hypersensitivity or immunologic hypersensitivity? What kind of time frame are you talking about with most people?
Well, there's an immediate effect where you can calm it down like on the spot. And originally when we made the GABA, it was because we had these patients that we were working on that might have Lyme disease or mold exposures, and they were hypersensitive to everything. So you'd give them GABA and you'd wait 20 minutes, and then you'd give them the next supplement. All of a sudden, they can take 5 times as much without freaking out, by just settling everything down. I've had people, I remember back in the day, I would be like flashy about it. They'd say, no, I can't take that, and that. And I'd be like, watch. And I give them GABA first, and give it a little bit of time. Then I'm like, all right, next. And here's lipoic acid. They'll be like, oh my God. And they're like, oh wow, I tolerated it fine. And you'd like move them really deep into their therapy by starting with the GABA. And so in 20 minutes, it's calmed down both the neurological and the immunological side. And the CBD is exactly the same thing in its timing. Now, then there's moving the full momentum of the system, and that's happening over a slower amount of time, but it's, days to weeks where you're titrating down this hypersensitivity.
One of the things that I found a lot of value in for GABA is turning down patients' glucagon response out of their pancreas. And it's been amazing working with these diabetes patients that have a terrible first phase insulin response. And one of the things that you can do, and the literature is going to talk about, you can return mast to beta cells with GABA. And it is phenomenal to see that effect in people where their medications don't work. They're on insulin. They always wake up with the dawn effect. It's phenomenal.
Oh, that is so cool, because CBD does some of that too. And it was like when I was doing for a CBD webinar for you, I was like, wait a second, they all do the same thing. And I found this GABA application to type 1 diabetes, where you've always heard about the CBD. And, I think we'll find maybe together they work the best, or sometimes one will work better than the other. But it's great to hear that. My son's a type 1, and for a while, he had real bad dawn effects, and we would just blast CBD at him to put him under control. And that's always been very reliable. Every time, something brings him into resistance, you just bring that back with the CBD. But I want to try the GABA now too.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen patients that are on insulin pumps for 35 years, and so it's been around a while.
Yeah.
And they'll use the GABA and follow an appropriate dietary recommendation, and their insulin usage will be net zero for the day. That's phenomenal.
How are you dosing them?
So we dose it basic to symptomatic relief, and we're doing that based off of the blood sugar values.
Yeah.
So
anywhere from 2 to 6 pumps, 2 to 3 times a day?
I mean, they might go 5 to 10 before each meal.
Right. Before the meal.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
5 to 10 minutes before each meal.
Okay.
So
wow.
Phenomenal, though. It's really fun to see.
Awesome.
You get these people that have been, they get beat up for 35, 40 years by the same disease. And, you know, and they start to take a little bit of control back. It's kind of fun to see, man.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's awesome.
One of the things that I very much get excited about is where this technology that you guys have developed can possibly take functional medicine. And so with the advent of putting liposomes inside of a capsule and creating these bomb effects, and like that's a new development in as far as like capacity to help people and delivering large amounts of product in a very absorbable format. I think that's pretty neat.
It's awesome. And this is, you know, I mean, what did we want to do in functional medicine? We wanted to be able to have the power of pharmaceuticals, but in a much more holistic approach. Right. And, you know, the absorptions weren't good enough. And what were pharmaceuticals? They'd start with a natural, and then they'd find some way to make it hyper reactive on a single target. So it would just manhandle a single target, make sure it was absorbable, and they just like, you know, Frankenstein the molecule till it did something. So we still want to maintain a broader, like multi-target approach. Like think how many targets curcumin hits. But it had all this promise, but you never got to the blood levels where you were really changing the system. And the first, you know, we've loved all the things that we've come out with. And yeah, the CBD was amazing, but that keto before 6, all of a sudden you flip someone into ketosis in an hour and a half, all through AMPK activation. And AMPK, this is what you're hitting with metformin and all the different diabetes drugs. Now we can hit it that rapidly and that hard. Now think of all the things we can put together where we can really change a system. Not like, well, take this for 6 months and then come back to me and I'll see if A1C changed 0.1%. You know, let's really get a change.
Yeah, and I feel bad for the docs that in the primary medical field or even endocrinology, like the 70s and 80s and 90s, and they're just like, oh, you're worse. Go figure.
Go figure. How about that? I keep adding layers of dysfunction to you with drugs. Right. And then think when we go into cancer, I mean, this is the deliveries that we need to get the botanicals in there to get in charge of this.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm excited because really where all of this technology is bringing people is to a place where disease is chronic disease. Yeah. That is going to be optional. Like lifestyle related conditions are going to be optional.
We will shift everything and give you this diet to support it. And then it's up to you if you want to stay there.
100%. And some people will choose it, right? Because some people are like slaves to the tongue, but and that's all right. But as long as it's a choice, I think there's some power in that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I get excited about it. I get to talk to doctors all over the country, and what you guys are doing right now with the technological advances that you've had. And then the consistency is the other thing. Every product that we're able to use with this liposomal delivery system has consistent results. Not like, oh, they changed the formula. What's going on here?
Oh. Consistency. The properties of the particle, be it a liposome or an emulsion particle, are part of the specifications. So they have to come out the same size every time, and we just test them up and down, and that's where the consistency comes from.
Yeah, and it's beautiful because as people kind of get their lives back and the ability to participate with their kids or go for a walk, for crying out loud, or whatever it is, to know that there's something there that's not going to be regulated by the FDA, however, still has that same quality. I think it's phenomenal. One of the things that is new in development as of late is this, basically an epidemic of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. And it's something that in the last 10 years has crept up on Americans and has become top 5 when it comes to diseases that people deal with when they're after 50 years old. And one of the big things with this, one of the big threats that Dr. Bredesen at UCLA figured out was heavy metal toxicity. And so as long as I have the world's leader on mercury toxicity on my podcast right now, I got to be asking you a few questions if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the way he figured that out is because one of his patients came to us because nothing was working. And it turned out to be mercury toxicity. And so I made the protocol that turned him around.
And that's why I'm asking. So that's beautiful. When you look at the percentages of people right now that are going through some form of function of cognitive decline, I got to tell you, I read labs all day, and I get to see thousands and thousands and thousands of cases every year. And heavy metal testing coming out of Quicksilver Scientific, these patients are a wreck. And one of my questions is, how come modern medicine is not looking at what modern medicine is causing?
Yeah, I mean, with the metals, with all the toxins, the problem is modern toxicology, and it was developed around acute poisonings, and they have no ability to look at what a chronic poisoning is. And so an acute poisoning to them is, so far beyond the 99th percentile, and anything below that's no problem. And it's like, so I could be at the 98th percentile of metal, and you're saying that's not going to be an issue for me? It's like, well, no, not in the short-term acute rat poisoning study we did. And there's no pharmaceutical for that. And so, the broken system is, there's a test for it, and there's a drug for it, and the code for the disease state. And if any of those aren't there, then it's just swept under the rug. And so that's really why that was missed. And it needs good testing. It needs good interpretation. It really, at its highest level, what it'll get to is blending the genetic testing for susceptibilities in the detoxification system. Call that the chemoprotective system, because at a cellular level, one of us can handle a lot of metals and another of us can't. So when we get those all tuned together and we say, oh, well, for your genetics, you got to be in the 25th percentile.
That's right.
In trouble. And that's where we're going to be super accurate. Because, I've still faced that. This guy's high, this guy's low, this guy's toxic, and that guy's not. And so you have to feel that out as a clinician. But we will, we're getting close. The panels are really coming together. My geneticist friends are moving those things forward. So I'm excited for where that's going to go.
Yeah, I like that. Being able to dial it in to be specific, I think, is going to be the next step in it. Because, you were in it longer than I have been, and you talk about metal detoxification. Oh, you got heavy metals in the 90s, and people roll your eyes. They just roll their eyes at you, and you're like, oh, yeah, you too, huh? And
is that Metallica or Soundgarden?
Yeah, that's right. Being able to put a specific number to a specific patient and being able to say, this is your load. Your body can only handle this much. Yeah. I think that's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So how far away do you think we are from that, by the way? I'm going to press you.
3 years from bullshitting your way through it, 5 to 10 from nailing it down. And how quickly functional medicine will get into the bullshitting your way through it, like the GHFR thing.
Storytellers, man. When you look at the heavy metal situation, things are getting real when the pharmaceutical industry starts trying to make medications that chelate. And there's a new one out there. I can edit this part of the podcast if you would like me to cut it out. But I have to ask you about this, even just to be selfish about it. Let me grab the name of the chemical here real quick. Oh, the brand name is Erminix. Have you heard of that one yet?
Oh, yeah, no, that comes from Boyd Haley. I'd hardly call it pharma because Boyd Haley was the Southern Baptist preacher against the pharmaceutical and medical establishment and scientific establishment. He was a PhD, head of the Department of Chemistry out of University of Kentucky. And he was doing all these assays looking at how heavy metals ruin all these enzymatic pathways, and mercury could destroy every enzymatic pathway. And all of a sudden, and he had been damaged by thimerosal from vaccines in his military days. And all of a sudden he got interested in this and he got really obsessed about it. And then he found this chelator that was used for wastewater treatment. And he started applying that to human use. And it was first called OSR, and he tried to bill it as a dietary supplement. It was totally synthetic chelator. And he's like, it's a dietary supplement. And that didn't go over so well. And so then he took it into trials, and he's got it as an orphan drug. And so it's a very hydrophobic. It's a big like phenyl molecule, and it's got some arms with sulfhydryls on it, and it's very powerful chelator. And in the early days, it was like I was coming on the scene with this IMD and glutathione, and he was over there with the OSR, and we were like, ah. And of course, then eventually we became friends, and I'd say, hey, man, look at the pathway. I bet it's upregulating this too. And he's like, oh, yeah, it is. Cool. The thing is, when you really want good detoxification, you have to nurture your inner detoxification system. That's the glutathione system along with metallothionein expression. And if you do that really well, that's all you need. And if you're going to use some synthetic chelator, you still need to nurture that underneath. Because even if I can go in and magically pull out the mercury and the cadmium and the arsenic, and why did it ever build up chronically in the first place? Now, maybe it's because you're a dentist and you're always exposed to it, but usually it's because you're under-functioning there, because either you don't have your neurology straight and you're always sympathetic dominant, and sympathetic dominance turns down detox. Maybe you're chronically inflamed by bad food, and that's chronically turning down detox. You need to repair all that, because you're never going to stop the onslaught of the molds and the metals and the plastics and the pesticides and the herbicides. I'll walk out of this building into all the pesticide-laced landscaping around me. You're never going to get away from that. You must fix the inner dialogue, the inner terrain of your detox. And you can add things on top. A lot of these guys will use like my system and then throw in a little bit of DMPS. But you need that inner working first.
I think that's an area that functional medicine providers can improve, is instead of having a phobia to everything. Well, I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't eat gluten. I don't eat corn. I don't breathe air.
Oh my God. And you get weaker every time you hide yourself away from those hormetic exposures.
Yeah. And so, like, there's this thing, right, that heals the edges of a cut together in the body. Like, work with it. Give it some building blocks, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you know,
cool.
And it is all hormetic exposures. All these things that don't kill you make you stronger. I mean, doesn't mean put yourself in harm's way.
Right.
But you got to be a badass out in the real world, not like as a monk, you know. It's like, even, you know, in the mysticisms, you know, the monks would go train up in the ashram, and they'd be like, oh, my mind is so peaceful because there's no stress. And then they get to a certain point and they throw the dudes out onto the street. They'd be like, go down to the city and see if you can still meditate. You know, eventually you got to go back to the city.
Words of wisdom from Chris Shade there. I appreciate your time today, sir. This is good podcast. And I appreciate the vision that you have and being able to execute that vision for people you don't even know. And I think that's cool. So there's some value to that. So I want you to know that.
Great. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I enjoy all of it, and I enjoy talking to you.
All right. Thanks, man. Have a good rest of your day.